And now for the reason we're all here tonight, Mr. John Robison. Mr. Robison is the author of the best-selling memoir, Looking in the Eye, My Life with Asperger's. His book has been published in over 20 editions and is sold in over 50 countries nationwide. Mr. Robison is a very active autism advocate, machine aficionado, photographer, car enthusiast, and small business owner. He founded and continues to own the J.E. Robison Service Company of Springfield, Massachusetts, known nationwide for restoration and customization of luxury and exotic vehicles. He has also started work at Elms College, developing a graduate program in autism and Asperger's. Mr. Robison was a unanimous choice for speaker to cap off the Patient's Voice series. He grew up with Asperger's well before a diagnosis was ever in the medical books, and he has led a life of adventure and success to this point. Following this evening with John Robison, perhaps all of us can be that much closer to understanding autism spectrum disorders and come closer to identifying with those with conditions like Asperger's. It is with great pleasure that I introduce Mr. John Robison.
Well, thank you all for coming out to see me. It's kind of neat being here in Tennessee. This is a place that I actually have long-standing ties to. You've read my name, John Elder Robison, on the book jacket. Up north, people figure that I just called myself John Elder Robison to distinguish myself from the John Robison that writes pornographic novels and the John Robison that writes a column about rigging slot machines and the other various John Robisons and Robinsons in the world are writing and stuff. But down here in the South, you know that many boys and girls have three names, and there's, Billy Joe and Mary Lou and stuff. And for me, being John Elder, I'm John Elder because my great-grandparents were Elders and Hendersons. My Elder and Henderson ancestors came from Chickamauga in northwest Georgia. And before they were in Chickamauga, my ancestors were right near here in Greene County, Tennessee. They came through the Gap, migrating from Virginia in the late 1700s. And I've kind of followed all that because one of my Aspergian interests is unraveling these genealogical mysteries. So I spent thousands and thousands of hours here in my mind studying these family patterns in Tennessee, where you are here, and then into Georgia. And it's always kind of fascinated me. It's neat for me to be here, no more than probably 25 miles from where my Henderson ancestors were settled and where some of them actually live today. I have a more recent connection to this area too. Some of you probably read my brother's book, Running with Scissors, right? And those of you who did, you know that my family had quite a bit of trouble with a psychiatrist going bad. And it's a kind of a strange thing because my brother had this kind of awful experience with Dr. Turcotte that he wrote about in the book. But I knew the doctor some 10 years before because I'm 10 years older than my brother. And Dr. Turcotte's the person who got my father to stop beating me up when he was drunk and enraged. And Dr. Turcotte didn't know about Asperger's, but he did some pretty great things for me to help me find my way as a pretty lost 11 and 12 and 13-year-old boy. So as much as I feel bad about how he subsequently kind of went off the track and things went awry, he did do a lot for me. The doctor came to our area because he was the psychiatrist at the Northampton State Hospital, and he came to the Northampton State Hospital after being at the hospital hospital here in Kingsport, Tennessee, and I believe he's a graduate of this particular medical school. And here we are now. So that's kind of neat anyway. But I guess that has little to do with why I'm here. I'm here to tell you about life as a free-range Asperger. Do most of you have some personal connection to autism or Asperger's? Yeah, well, some of you are raising your hands. I'll bet a lot of you just won't admit it. So, anyway, I grew up down here in Georgia and in other places when my parents went to school before they had this high-functioning autism or Asperger diagnosis. When I was a child, autistic people were only diagnosed if they were totally disabled. And they put you in the state school. So whenever I would act weirder than I usually did, my parents would threaten me with that. They would say, well, if you can't act right, let's send you to Belchertown State School. I'm sure that you have institutions like that here in Tennessee. They are places that no child wants to go. And I grew up with a powerful incentive with the threat of that state school to kind of learn how to fit in. But I couldn't ever really get it right. When I was very young, 3 and 4 years old, I had trouble playing with other kids. The problem was, even with something simple, like a sandbox and a line of blocks, there is a right way and a wrong way to arrange those blocks. And some of these kids could not get it right. Now, we had a show on TV back then called The Three Stooges. Some of you probably remember. I learned 2 things from The Three Stooges to help me deal with those kids who couldn't get it right. I learned the 2-finger eye poke, and I learned the 2-handed bang on the ears. So anyhow, I kind of started out trouble with getting along with these kids, but it wasn't my fault because they always did it wrong. And despite my best efforts, I couldn't teach them. Well, unfortunately, I couldn't make friends with them either. I wrote about some of those stories in my book. As funny as they are to describe to me today, every time I would have one of these failures, I would kind of cry inside. Because, you know, I wanted these kids to like me. But more than that, I wanted them to line the blocks up right. Of course, today, I look at that and I recognize it as this autistic compulsion. Those of you who have Asperger's, you know what that feels like. You know you just got to do it that way. And I couldn't abide any other way. But at the same time, I was so hurt when people would laugh at me, and they'd call me names, they'd call me a retard, they'd call me other bad stuff. And it really hurt. And I grew up to be progressively more isolated. Somehow, I stayed engaged with other people. You know, I look today at some autistic people who don't talk and who really don't engage the world, and I think back to when I was little, and I think about how my parents were both college professors. Well, back when I was real little, my parents were both college students. But all my life, all my childhood, I was in a college environment. So even though I'd go out on a playground and a kid would come up to me